Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs, and members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Sommelier of Cinema, your Archbishop of Banterbury, and of course, as we all know, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you from the Robservatory. Robcasting you from the Robservatory. You know, I had this whole show set up, ready to go, and when I was connecting, it all just went kerflooey. I don't understand why. Not unlike scrubbing a mission, but I was hoping that I was going to be able to come to you after SPACEX and NASA had triumphantly returned Americans to space from American soil on an American-built spacecraft, but because of, let's face it, safety factors, they had to scrub the mission, which has been moved until Saturday at 3:33. They will try again, and hopefully they will triumph. Confidence was very high with me. I was very excited. I've been excited for space missions since I was a little kid, and every time SpaceX launches rockets, I get excited. This was obviously the most exciting of all, but it wasn't meant to be. However, that doesn't mean we're not going to have a great show. I'm still going to cover the same material, which is basically a celebration of space and our space programs. I've also got some really good letters from people today, which is actually a lot came in, which is pretty cool. And since I am broadcasting now, Robcasting at all of you, I think it's time that let me first of all switch cameras, and I can jump into it. By the way, Rob Liefeld, the comic artist, who I know, who I really like, has started his own Robservations podcast today. It's on Spotify. Now, to be fair, I did not come up with the name Robservations. There are other people who have had it in the past. I wasn't aware of anyone that was using it in the genre or punditry space, so I felt it'd be fun to use. Rob Liefeld did have a column back in the 90s that ran in Wizard a few times called Robservations. So I felt that I have no problem with him doing that. And if there's two competing Robservations, competition's good for the soul, right? I mean, this is, after all, episode 427 of my Robservations. And if there's confusion in the marketplace, hey, if we can push people to one another's channels, hopefully that just means more great content for everyone. And I wish Rob the best. Plus, I'm doing a video cast. He's doing a podcast. I know Spotify is building a video component, so maybe he will add video. But people have asked me. I have no problem with it at all. And we will continue on as Robservations, the show about something. Now, this first article I wanted to read is from Forbes. Forbes back from 2017. And it's by Ethan Siegel, who's a senior contributor, and this was an editor's pick. Why exploring space and investing in research is non-negotiable. Around the country and around the world, there is no shortage of human suffering. Poverty, disease, violence, hurricanes, wildfire, and more are constantly plaguing humanity, and even our... Hang on, let me get rid of that. And even our best efforts thus far can't address all of everybody's needs. Many are looking for places to cut funding, ostensibly to divert more to humanitarian needs, and one of the first places that comes up in conversation is extraneous spending on unnecessary scientific research. What good is it to conduct microgravity experiments when children are starving? Why smash particles together or pursue the lowest possible temperatures when Puerto Rico is still without power? And why study the esoteric mating habits of endangered species when nuclear war threatens our planet? To put it more succinctly, with all the suffering in the world, starvation, disease, persecution, and natural disasters, why should we spend public money on an enterprise like fundamental scientific research? This is a line of thinking that's come up repeatedly throughout history. Yes, it's short-sighted in that it fails to recognize that our greatest problems require long-term investment, and that society's greatest advances come about through hard work, research, development, and are often only realized years, decades, or generations after that investment is made. Investing in science is investing in the betterment of humanity. But that's not always an easy path to see, particularly when suffering is right in front of you. Back in early 1970s, shortly after the first Apollo landing, a nun working in Zambia, Africa, Sister Mary Jacunda, wrote to NASA. She asked how they could justify spending billions on the Apollo program when children were starving to death. If one pictures these two images side by side, it hardly seems fair. And here are the two images. There you go. The Saturn V versus a starving child. The letter somehow made it to the desk of one of the top rocket scientists at NASA, Ernst Stuhlinger. At the time, Stuhlinger was one of the scientists brought to the United States as part of Operation Paperclip at the conclusion of World War II. He was serving as the Associate Director of Science at NASA. Fearing an accusation of inhumanity must have been particularly painful for someone who was still often accused of being a Nazi for his role in the German rocket program, but Stuhlinger was unshaken. He responded by writing the following letter, reprinted in its entirety below. It's long and only contained one picture, but it's arguably even more relevant today. I wonder if I can get this ad out of here as well. There we go. Your letter was one of many which are reaching me every day, but it has touched me more deeply than all the others because it came so much from the depths of a searching mind and compassionate heart. I will try and answer your question as best I can. First, however, I would like to express my great admiration for you and for all of your many brave sisters, because you are dedicating your lives to the noblest cause of man, help for his fellow man who are in need. You asked in your letter how I could suggest the expenditures of billions of dollars for a voyage to Mars at a time when many children on this earth are starving to death. I know that you do not expect an answer such as, "Oh, I did not know that there are children dying from hunger, but from now on I will desist from any kind of space research until mankind has solved that problem." In fact, I have known of famine-aided children long before I knew that a voyage to the planet Mars is technically feasible. However, I believe, like many of my friends, that traveling to the moon and eventually to Mars and to other planets is a venture which we should undertake now. And I even believe that this project, in the long run, will contribute more to the solution of these grave problems we are facing here on Earth than many other potential projects of help which are debated and discussed year after year and which are so extremely slow in yielding tangible results. Before trying to describe in more detail how our space program is contributing to the solution of our earthly problems, I would like to relate briefly a supposedly true story that may help support the argument. Oh, don't tell me that there's some craziness happening here. What can you do? I can't move this story. Maybe I can reboot it. Hold on. Hold, please. Oh, there we go. Hopefully it'll come back. However, I believe, like many of my friends, that traveling to the moon and eventually to Mars and to other planets is a venture which we should undertake now. And I even believe that this project, in the long run, will contribute more to the solution of these grave problems we are facing here on Earth than many other potential projects of help which are debated and discussed year after year, and which are so extremely slow in yielding tangible results. Before trying to describe in more detail how our space program is contributing to the solution of our earthly problems, I would like to relate a brief supposedly true story, which may help support the argument. About 400 years ago, there lived a count in a small town in Germany. He was one of the benign counts, and he gave a large part of his income to the poor in his town. This was much appreciated, because poverty was abundant during medieval times, and there were epidemics of the plague which ravaged the country frequently. One day, the count met a strange man. He had a workbench and a little laboratory in his house, and he labored hard during the daytime so that he could afford a few hours every evening to work in his laboratory. He ground small lenses from pieces of glass. He mounted the lenses in tubes, and he used these gadgets to look at very small objects. The Count was particularly fascinated by the tiny creatures that could be observed with the strong magnification, and which he had never seen before. He invited the man to move with his laboratory to the castle, to become a member of the Count's household, and to devote henceforth all his time to the development and perfection of the optical gadgets as a special employee of the Count. The townspeople, however, became angry when they realized that the Count was wasting his money, as they thought, on a stunt without purpose. "We're suffering from this plague," they said, "while he is paying that man for a useless hobby." But the Count remained firm. "I give you as much as I can afford," he said, "but I will also support this man in his work because I know that someday something will come out of it." Indeed, something very good came out of his work, and also out of similar work done by others at other places. The microscope. It is well known that the microscope had contributed more than any other invention to the progress of medicine, and that the elimination of the plague and many other contagious diseases from most parts of the world is largely a result of the studies which the microscope made possible. But the Count, by retaining some of his spending money for research and discovery, contributed far more to the relief of human suffering than he could have contributed by giving all he possibly could spare to his plague-ridden community. The situation we are facing today is similar in many respects. The President of the United States is spending about $200 billion in his yearly budget. This money goes to health, education, welfare, urban renewal, highways, transportation, foreign aid, defense, conservation, science, agriculture, and many installations inside and outside the country. About 1.6% of this national budget was allocated to space exploration this year. The space program includes Project Apollo and many other smaller projects in space physics, space astronomy, space biology, planetary projects, Earth resources projects, and space engineering. To make this expenditure for the space program possible, the average American taxpayer with $10,000 per income per year is paying about 30 tax dollars for space. The rest of his income, $9,970, remains for his subsistence, his recreation, his savings, his other taxes, and all of his other expenditures. You will probably ask now, why don't you take $5 or $3 or $1 out of the 30 space dollars, which the average American taxpayer is paying, and send those dollars to the hungry children? To answer this question, I have to explain briefly how the economy of this country works. The situation is very similar in other countries. The government consists of a number of departments: Interior, Justice, Health, Education, Welfare, Transportation, Defense, and others. And the Bureau, the National Science Foundation, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and others. All of them prepare their yearly budgets according to their assigned missions, and each of them must defend its budget against extremely severe screening by congressional committees and against heavy pressure for economy from the Bureau of Budget and the President. When the funds are finally approved by Congress, they can be spent only for the line items specified and approved in the budget. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration, naturally, can only contain items directly related to aeronautics and space. If this budget were not approved by Congress, the funds proposed for it would not be available for something else. They would simply not be levied from the taxpayer unless one of the other budgets had obtained approval for a specific increase, which would then absorb the funds not sent for space. You realize from this brief discourse that support for hungry children, or rather a support in addition to what the United States is already contributing to this very worthy cause in the form of foreign aid, can be obtained only if the appropriate department submits a budget line item for this purpose, and if this line item is approved by Congress. You may ask now whether I personally would be in favor of such a move by our government. My answer is an emphatic yes. Indeed, I would not mind at all if my annual taxes were increased by a number of dollars for the purpose of feeding hungry children wherever they may live. I know that all of my friends feel the same way. However, we could not bring such a program to life merely by desisting from making plans for voyages to Mars. On the contrary, I even believe that by working for the space program, I can make some contribution to the relief and eventual solution of such grave problems as poverty and hunger on Earth. Basic to the hunger problem are two functions: the production of food and the distribution of food. Food production by agriculture, cattle ranching, ocean fishing, and other large-scale operations is efficient in some parts of the world, but drastically deficient in many others. For example, large areas of land could be utilized far better if efficient methods of watershed control, fertilizer use, weather forecasting, fertility assessment, plantation programming, field selection, planting habits, timing of cultivation, crop survey, and harvest planning were applied. The best tool for the improvement of all of these functions undoubtedly is the artificial Earth satellite. Circling the globe at a high altitude, it can screen wide areas of land within a short time. It can observe and measure a large variety of factors indicating the status and condition of crops, soil, droughts, rainfall, snow cover, etc. It can radio this information to ground stations for appropriate use. It has been estimated that even a modest system of Earth satellites, equipped with Earth resources, sensors, working within a program for worldwide agricultural improvements, will increase the yearly crops by an equivalent of many billions of dollars. The distribution of food to the needy is a completely different problem. The question is not so much one of shipping volume, it is one of international cooperation. The ruler of a small nation may feel very uneasy about the prospect of having large quantities of food shipped into his country by a large nation, simply because he fears that along with the food there may also be an import of influence and foreign power. Efficient relief from hunger, I am afraid, will not come before the boundaries between nations have become less divisive than they are today. I do not believe that space flight will accomplish this miracle overnight. However, the space program is certainly among the most promising and powerful agents working in that direction. Let me remind you of the near-recent tragedy of Apollo 13, when the time of the crucial re-entry of the astronauts approached. The Soviet Union discontinued all Russian radio transmissions in frequency bands used by the Apollo project in order to avoid any possible interference. And Russian ships stationed themselves in the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans in case an emergency rescue would become necessary. Had the astronaut capsule touched down near a Russian ship, the Russians would undoubtedly have expended as much care and effort in their rescue as if Russian cosmonauts had returned from a space trip. If Russian space travelers should ever be in a similar emergency situation, Americans would do the same without any doubt. Higher food production through survey and assessment from orbit, and better food distribution through improved international relations are only two examples of how profoundly the space program will impact life on Earth. I would like to quote two other examples: stimulation of technological development and a generation of scientific knowledge. The requirements for high precision and for extreme reliability which must be imposed upon the components of a moon-traveling spacecraft are entirely unprecedented in the history of engineering. The development of systems which meet these severe requirements has provided us a unique opportunity to find new material and methods, to invent better technical systems, to improve manufacturing procedures, to lengthen the lifetimes of instruments, and even to discover new laws of nature. All of this newly acquired technical knowledge is also available for application to earthbound technologies. Every year, about 1,000 technical innovations generated in the space program field find their ways into our earthly technology, where they lead to better kitchen equipment and farm appliances, better sewing machines and radios, better ships and airplanes, better weather forecasting and storm warning, better communications, better medical instruments, better utensils and tools for everyday life. Presumably you will ask now why we must develop first a life support system for our moon-traveling astronauts before we can build a remote reading sensor system for heart patients. The answer is simple. Significant progress in the solutions of technical problems is frequently made not by a direct approach, but by first setting a goal of high challenge, which offers a strong motivation for innovative work, which fires the imagination and spurs men to expend their best efforts, and which acts as a catalyst by including chains of other reactions. Spaceflight, without any doubt, is playing exactly this role. The voyage to Mars will certainly not be a direct source of food for the hungry. However, it will lead to so many new technologies and capabilities that the spin-offs from this project alone would be worth many times the cost of its implementation. Besides the need for new technologies, there is a continuing great need for new basic knowledge in the sciences if we wish to improve the conditions of human life on Earth. We need more knowledge in physics and chemistry, in biology and physiology, and very particularly in medicine, to cope with all these problems which threaten men's lives. Hunger, disease, contamination of food and water, pollution of the environment. We need more young men and women who choose science as a career. This is all, I don't know why this is going so crazy. Who choose science as a career, and we need better support for those scientists who have the talent and determination to engage in fruitful research work. Challenging research objectives must be available, and sufficient support for research projects must be provided. Again, the space program, with its wonderful opportunities to engage in truly magnificent research studies of moons and planets, of physics and astronomy, of biology and medicine, is an almost ideal catalyst which induces the reaction between motivation for scientific work, opportunities to observe exciting phenomena of nature, and material support needed to carry out the research effort. Among all the activities which are directed, controlled, and funded by the American government, the space program is certainly the most visible and probably the most debated activity, although it consumes only 1.6% of the total national budget, and 3 per mile, less than 1/3 of 1% of the gross national product. 3 per milli of the gross national product. As a stimulant and catalyst for the development of new technologies and for research in the basic sciences, it is unparalleled by any other activity. In this respect, we may even say that the space program is taking over a function which for 3,000 or 4,000 years has been the sad prerogative of war. How much human suffering can be avoided if nations, instead of competing with their bomb-dropping fleets of airplanes and rockets, compete with their moon-traveling spaceships? This competition is full of promise. Sorry, this is so hard to read because of this weird Google thing. This competition is full of promise for brilliant victories, but it leaves no room for the bitter fate of the vanquished, which bleeds nothing but revenge and new wars. Although our space program seems to lead us away from our Earth and out toward the moon, the sun, the planets, and the stars, I believe that none of these celestial objects will find as much attention and study by space scientists as our Earth. It will become a better Earth, not only because all of the new technological and scientific knowledge with which we will apply to the betterment of life, but also because we're developing a far deeper appreciation of our Earth, of life, and of man. The photograph which I enclose with this letter shows a view of our Earth as seen from Apollo 8 when it orbited the moon at Christmas 1968. Of all of the many wonderful results of the space program so far, this picture may be the most important one. It opened our eyes to the fact that our Earth is a beautiful and most precious island in an unlimited void, and that there's no other place for us to live but the thin surface layer of our planet, bordered by the bleak nothingness of space. Never before did so many people recognize how limited our Earth really is, and how perilous it would be to tamper with its ecological balance. Ever since this picture was first published, voices have become louder and louder, warning of the grave problems that confront man in our time: pollution, hunger, poverty, urban living, food production, water control, overpopulation. It is certainly not by accident that we begin to see the tremendous tasks waiting for us at a time when the young space age has provided us the first good look at our own planet. Very fortunately, though, the space age not only holds out a mirror in which we can see ourselves, it also provides us with the technologies, the challenge, the motivation, and even with the optimism to attack those tasks with confidence. What we learn in our space program, I believe, and if I can actually get down here because this old thing keeps getting stuck. And here I was gonna read this and give you a great, I don't know, Richard Burton-esque reading of this letter. So I apologize. And now, for whatever reason, this particular website, anyway. It is certainly not by accident that we begin to see the tremendous tasks waiting for us at a time when the young space age has provided us the first good look at our own planet. Very fortunately, though, oh my God, sorry about that, people. I need to turn off my cookies or whatever. So much for my dramatic reading. Very fortunately, though, the space age not only holds out a mirror in which we can see ourselves, it also provides us with the technologies, the challenge, the motivation, and even with the optimism to attack these tasks with confidence. What we learn in our space program, I believe, is fully supporting what Albert Schweitzer had in mind when he said, "I am looking at the future with concern, but with good hope. My very best wishes will always be with you and your children." Here is the picture that he was talking about. Anyway, I'm going to not continue to read this article because I think that letter was pretty much, well, unless I can get more of this. This is kind of a bummer. But anyway, I think you get the gist, and I profusely apologize for the horrible reading that I gave you of that letter. But let me put this in the live stream so you can read it on your own, because I think it was definitely worth sharing. So there you go. And now there's another one I wanted to read. Hopefully this will come off a little better. And this one actually was in Universe Today. And it was published, let's see, does it say when? January 26, 2015. And this is by Elizabeth Howell. What are the benefits of space exploration? Why explore space? It is an expensive arena to play in between the fuel costs and the technological challenge of operating in a hostile environment. For humans, a small mistake can quickly become fatal, something that we've seen several times in space history. And for NASA's budget, there are projects that come in late and over budget, drawing the ire of Congress and the public. These are some of the drawbacks. But for the rest of this article, we will focus on some of the benefits going where few humans have gone before. Spin-offs. Perhaps the most direct benefit comes from technologies used on Earth that were first pioneered in space exploration. This is something that all agencies talk about, but we'll focus on NASA's spin-off program as an example. NASA will be used as a prime example for most of this article, but many of those cited benefits also are quoted by other space agencies. The program arose from NASA's desire to showcase spin-offs at congressional budget hearings, according to its website. This began with the Technology Utilization Program report in 1973, which began as a black and white circular and progressed to color in 1976 following public interest. Since that year, NASA has published more than 1,800 reports on spin-offs. The agency has several goals in doing this. Dispelling the myth of wasted taxpayer dollars is one NASA cites, along with encouraging the public to follow space exploration and showing how American ingenuity can work in space. There are many commercialized advances the program says it contributed to, including memory foam, first used in airline crash protection, magnetic resonance imaging and smoke detection. In many cases, NASA did not invent the technology itself, but pushed it along, the agency says. But as a counterpoint to NASA's arguments, some critics argue the technology would have been developed anyway without space exploration, or that the money went on exploration itself does not justify the spin-off. Job creation. Another popularly cited benefit of space exploration is job creation, or the fact that a space agency and its network of contractors, universities, and other entities help people stay employed. From time to time, NASA puts out figures concerning how many associated jobs a particular project generates, or the economic impact. Here's an example. In 2012, NASA Administrator Charles Bolden published a blog post about the Curiosity Mars rover landing, which was picked up by the White House website. It is also important to remember that the $2.5 billion investment made in the project was not spent on Mars, but right here on Earth, supporting more than 7,000 jobs in at least 31 states, he wrote. But the benefit can cut in a negative way, too. NASA's budget is allocated by Congress, which means that the amount of money it has available for employment fluctuates. There are also some programs that are highly dependent on grants, which can make stable jobs challenging in those fields. Finally, as the priorities of Congress or NASA change, jobs can evaporate with it. One example was the space shuttle's retirement, which prompted a job loss so massive that NASA had a transition strategy for its employees and contractors. By the way, for anybody that was watching today's launch, they talked a lot about that day when they ended the shuttle program and many people were sent home. It's also unclear what constitutes a job under NASA parlance. Some universities have researchers working on multiple projects, NASA-related or not. Employment can also be full-time, part-time, or occasional. So while job creation is cited as a benefit, more details about those jobs are needed to make an informed decision about how much good it does. Education. Teaching has a high priority for NASA, so much so that it has flown astronaut educators in space. The first one, Krista McAuliffe, died aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger during launch in 1986. Her backup, Barbara Morgan, was selected as an educator mission specialist in 1998 and flew aboard STS-118 in 2007. And to this day, astronauts regularly do in-flight conferences with students from space, ostensibly to inspire them to pursue careers in the field. The NASA Education Office has 3 goals: making the workforce stronger, encouraging students to produce STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and engaging Americans in NASA's mission. Other space agencies also have education components to assist with requirements in their own countries. It's also fair to say the Public Affairs Office for NASA and other agencies play roles in education, although they also talk about topics such as missions in progress. But it's hard to figure out how well the educational efforts translate into inspiring students, according to a National Research Council report on NASA's primary and secondary education program in 2008. Among other criticisms, the program was cited as unstable, as it needs to change with political priorities, and there was little rigorous evaluation of its effectiveness. But NASA's emphasis on science and discovery was also praised. Anecdotally, however, many astronauts and people within NASA have spoken about being inspired by watching missions such as Apollo take place. And the same is true of people who are peripherally involved in the field too. A personal example, this author first became interested in space in the mid-1990s through the movie Apollo 13, which led her to watching the space shuttle program more closely. Intangible benefits. Added to this host of business-like benefits, of course, are the intangibles. What sort of value can you place on better understanding the universe? Think of finding methane on Mars, or discovering an exoplanet, or constructing the International Space Station to do long-term exploration studies. Each has a cost associated with it, but with each also comes a smidgen of knowledge we can add to the encyclopedia of the human race. Space can also inspire art, which is something seen heavily in 2014 following the arrival of the European Space Agency Rosetta mission at Comet 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko. It's inspired songs, short videos, and many other works of art. NASA's missions, particularly those of the space explorers of the 50s and 60s, inspired creations from people as famous as Norman Rockwell. There are also benefits that maybe we cannot anticipate ahead of time. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, is a network that advocates looking for life around the universe, likely because communicating with beings outside of Earth could bring us some benefit. And perhaps there is another space-related discovery just around the corner that will change our lives drastically. So there you go. There was another article that I thought was worth sharing. Now, I've got more, but I won't read them. I'll save them. Sorry, the show today is not going as well as I want, but I'm not going to scrub it. I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue on. I'm going to soldier through, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to soldier through. And you guys have a lot to say today, so let me soldier through with you guys. So, Star Wars Rocks sends in a tip and says, "Hi, Rob. I know I asked you this question in yesterday's show, but I didn't actually finish writing it before sending it to you. So do you think that $50 million for a superhero movie that isn't in the MCU, or the DC universe is enough or not?" Of course, I also included Star Wars. It really depends. Look, there are superhero movies such as The Crow, which were made for a lot less money. The Crow was obviously very stylized. It used miniatures. that weren't exactly hiding the fact that they were miniatures, and it had minimal effects. But I still think The Crow is one of the best comic book adaptations we've ever seen. It really depends what kind of filmmaking you're doing. I think really, I mean, obviously, when you're into special effects, you are going to hamper yourself and what your abilities to pull things off are, because special effects, flying effects, for instance, are expensive. But look at a movie like Josh Trank's, his film, Chronicle. Look at that movie. That had some really interesting flying effects, some of the best I'd ever seen. And it didn't break the bank. Now, I know it wasn't based on a particular comic book, but it was, in fact, a superhero movie, an origin story, and I thought it was really effective. So it really depends. You have to tailor your budget to the kind of movie that you're making, and also the kind of movie that you know you can make. So I think that's important. Bob Quall is here, and he sends in a tip. By the way, Bob is building a giant like King Kong for his Halloween display. It looks pretty dope. Got to follow what he's doing. On the cusp of the X flight, Mr. B, how closely did you follow 2011's X Prize spaceflight competition? I followed it quite closely, actually. There were such displays of ingenuity and bravado, very much an old-school Wright brothers feel to the competitors. Oh, I thought so, too. I mean, I thought it was great. And again, you know, I am talking to you right now because of byproducts of space research. I mean, my favorite thing is hair dryers, handheld hair dryers, being able to heat up monofilaments, and you can blow hot air through them. The idea of heating up monofilaments was actually pioneered really by the Apollo program or the space program, because they needed ways to keep, when you're breathing out, condensation happens, and they needed a way to keep the controls from having water from condensation on them. So they had monofilaments heating up, low weight, and a lot of power was generated. So that's just one of many examples of the benefits that trickle down. Hey, we have hair dryers because of the space program. How about that? Star Wars Rock sends in another tip and says, "Hi, Rob. I just found an article about when your viewers from Europe can expect to gain access to HBO Max, and I think you'd find it interesting." Well, I do find it interesting, and why don't we put this article in the live chat, which we can do. So there you go. Willow is here. Willow sends in a tip and says, "What happened to Riker in Second Chances? Did he basically undergo mitosis and become two Rikers, both with the memories of the original, but the original no longer exists?" Well, that's a very good question. People have brought that up many, many times. Riker was in a transporter accident, and he didn't even know it. Part of him was reflected back. I mean, hard to say what really happened, Willow. I think that's sort of beyond my pay grade, perhaps. But one never knows. I mean, you know, I think with that episode, you have to just go with the idea that every one of these stories gets one ask. And the ask is that somehow the transporter beam got reflected back. One made it and one didn't. One got reflected back. Now, where does the mass come from to actually, well, make a person? That's the ask I think the episode gets. But what I love about science fiction is when that story was told, the idea that this other Riker was created, and they both had exactly the same memories, but then one had to live his life where he was trapped, and the other went on and moved his way up through the ranks. I mean, I love that. They really were both the same person, but their experiences obviously had changed or were different because of what happened after the accident. I love that idea. I think it's a great science fiction conceit, and it worked really well telling stories. But I couldn't begin to explain it from a scientific standpoint. I'll leave that to you when you get your PhD. You know, maybe, Willow, you'll write a book on there's already a book on the science of Star Trek and stuff, but it'd be interesting if you maybe tackled it from a different angle. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, "With all the talk about the Snyder Cut of Justice League, Warner Brothers have probably already gotten a lot of bang for their buck when it comes to marketing for HBO Max." Oh, no doubt. HBO Max, I mean, they did that. It was perfectly timed. HBO Max went live today. And, of course, I've already read a bunch of bitching online. I mean, it's not like everything's going to be available right away. It takes time to put this stuff, make it available with all the metadata and actually getting all the files up. So give it time. I think it'll work out. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole Snyder Cut, all of it was a media event to generate excitement for HBO Max, and it did just that. They probably made millions and millions of dollars worth of marketing because of that and awareness. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, Rob, please don't strike the Palpatine lightning down upon me for saying this, but I own the shunned Justice League on Blu-ray. But now with the Snyder Cut coming to HBO Max, do you think it will also be on Blu-ray so that I may exile my current copy of Justice League? Well, first of all, I would keep it just as a comparison piece. It's a lesson, comparing and contrasting the two. I saw people like destroying their copies of Justice League, and I'm like, well, how moronic is that? Do you have one with special features? Why not hang on to it? I mean, if nothing else, it's a reminder of persevering for your artistic integrity. So I don't hold it against you. I actually didn't buy it, which surprised me, but I did not. So hang on to that. Damo Davies sends in a tip and says, greetings from the UK. How would you have taken the Kobayashi Maru test in Star Trek? I personally wouldn't have crossed the neutral zone and violated treaty, as the ramifications of that would be far worse than the loss of one ship, the needs of the many. Huh. Well, it really depends. I mean, ultimately, you have to rescue people. Are you going to knowingly let people die? I mean, I probably would have tried to get in. Maybe if there was something that I could do utilizing the transporters where I could get in quick and get in quick, try and beam everybody as quickly as possible out and get out. Maybe use the Picard maneuver, although it didn't exist yet. But I would have tried to rescue the ship and the people. Damo says, did you ever watch the BBC TV series Sherlock, a modern-day iteration of consulting detectives starring Benedict Cumberbatch in the title role and Martin Freeman as Dr. Watson? This is the holy grail of Sherlock, in my view. It's the best show ever. It's a great show. I didn't watch every episode, but it's certainly a good show. I really enjoyed it. Julius Goodwin is here. Julius, your generosity never ceases to amaze me. As far as being right about the whole Snyder Cut, if it exists, costs, etc., you're a better man than me, sir, because I'd be standing on the highest pulpit I could find, naked and covered in jello, because hell, why not? Screaming, damn it, I told you so. Well, I'm not usually, I'm not that kind of a person, really. I might acknowledge it, but I don't. See, the thing about this is the people that wanted the Snyder Cut, very few of them had any working knowledge of the entertainment industry. And they don't, or maybe not so much the industry itself, but how movies are actually made. Hell, I work with people who work in the industry that have a very little understanding of how post-production works. Post-production is a real mystery. A lot of people can understand production. You can wrap your head around production. But post-production is a whole different animal altogether. And if you don't work in it, it's sometimes very hard to wrap your head around. And the idea of how film editing works today is also very nebulous, because it isn't just so cut and dried as, well, we shot this footage and we're editing this footage, especially in our visual effects world of today with a movie like Justice League. So I just found it frustrating that when I would argue with people online, they would always throw back things to me. Well, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that. I'm like, I understand that, but the people that are talking, they're also understanding the whether you're a composer like Junkie XL or whether you're an actor that's seen a cut. I mean, the composers might, but actors, they don't understand the intricacies of post usually. There's so much that's going on. And even when you say, yeah, I said this before, yes, the picture is locked. Well, picture's locked. Like, I'll give you an example. So the short film that I worked on, Skyfighter, with Lucas Kendall, that you can see, Dust picked it up. It's on the Dust network. That film, it takes place inside a space fighter bomber, has a lot of hologram shots. And we had to lock a picture cut before we sent those shots to our effects artists to do the visual effects. So we had a cut of the movie. The movie was locked. It was a locked picture cut. So I could say, yes, we've locked our cut. There were no visual effects. So we had to wait 4 months. I mean, we did it shot by shot, waited for them to come in. But we still had to lock picture because it had to be frame accurate. So if I were to say, let's say our movie Skyfighter was, for the sake of argument, the Snyder Cut. And somebody said, but Rob, where were you at in the process before you were replaced? I would have said, well, we locked picture. It was done. And that would not be a lie. That would be exactly the truth. Now, people might have said, oh my God, release Rob's version of Skyfighter. Release the Rob cut. Well, I wouldn't have released it because it wasn't done. The cut was done, but all the effects are outstanding. And then there's people who start saying, well, most of the effects are done. What does that mean? You know how many different kinds of effects? Are you talking about the green screen, the cityscapes that have to be put in? What are you talking about? Like all the effects are done. What do you know? And that's why it was so frustrating. Even when somebody like, was it Jay Oliveira, who's an animation director. He was out there beating the drum for the Snyder Cut, and the things that he was saying, it was frustrating to read them because he's an industry insider. He understands this. He directs animated features, and animated features, the big budget studio features have gone the way of how animated features are made, where you start out with storyboards or story reels that give way to animatics, that give way to different iterations of finished shots. It's a completely iterative process because it's animation. Well, live action films, big budget live action films like this are also very iterative. And when you say you've locked picture, that doesn't mean you're anywhere near the end of the process. So all these people were saying these things. Oh, I've seen this, or yes, I've seen that, or yes, this exists. But none of them knew what state was actually, like if someone said, Rob, release the Rob cut of Skyfighter, I would have said, we never got around to doing the effects, and there's over 100 effect shots, and each effect shot has a dollar value associated with it. And I don't know what to tell you. Like with Skyfighter, it was a low-budget movie. Let's say each one of those effect shots cost $100. I mean, they didn't cost that much, but let's just say they did. Well, and we've got over 100, say 100 effect shots for $100. That's a lot of money. Where's that going to come from? Well, it comes from HBO Max. But that was, so I don't want to ever get mad at people like that. I don't want to say I told you so because we're talking about different things. And what I was curious about was about the holistic post-production process and what needed to be done. And if I had to say, it was very funny because people were coming at me on Twitter, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, oh no, I really do know what I'm talking about, but I can sit there and tell you that, no, you don't know what you're talking about, and nothing what's productive about that. It's always very funny when people start coming at you and they don't know who you are, and they don't do any research. They just start getting in your face. And I'm not saying that I know I'm not the end-all, be-all, but in terms of my experience on sets, I'll tell you this. I mean, being in country for months at a time on Lord of the Rings, on Superman Returns, being there for 14 months or whatever, and 14 months on Chronicles of Narnia, my team and I got a better look at how large budget $200 million movies are made than just about anybody, because even the people that work on those films don't get to go between all the different departments and sit there and interview people and shoot them doing what they're doing. I mean, I had an incredible education. I mean, I worked in low budget films, but to be on actual film sets, like if somebody came to me tomorrow and said, Rob, could you direct a $200 million movie? I'd say, hey, hell yes, I can. Well, you've never done it before. And I'm like, yeah, but I spent a decade of my life on sets watching everybody do their jobs and then making documentaries about that. So while I didn't call the shots as a director or whatever, I certainly have an incredible working knowledge of how movies are made on every level. And so, it's interesting. But I would never want to say that, even though I wouldn't mind, I'd love to get in people's faces. But I'm just not that kind of person. I would rather educate people. That's what this channel's all about. When people ask questions about, well, how does this work? I try and answer it to the best of my ability. Julius goes on to say, now let me get this right. The most sophisticated, powerful, and advanced spacecraft ever built just got stopped by bad weather. Somewhere, Gene Roddenberry just rolled over in his grave and died again. Well, Julius, look, they could have launched that rocket and it probably would have gone off without a hitch. Probably would have. But first and foremost, being that this is the first manned test flight of a ship that has never flown with a manned crew into space before, there's no margin for error. So 99.9% they have to go with safety. Always. They have to go with safety. So I wholeheartedly agree with you, but if there's any shred of unsafe things going on, they have to always err on the side of caution. Patrick Keller is here and sends in a tip and says, Rob, you know me from my Hot Toys reviews. I wanted to say you do a great job every day, and despite of that, you took the time to watch my videos and found nice words to say. Thanks so much. Greetings to my friend Lars, Sabrina, and Dita. Have a good show. Well, thank you, Patrick. I would assume, Patrick, your English is quite good, but Patrick has a new Hot Toys channel in German, and he's been doing a good job, and I've quite enjoyed it. So, as a matter of fact, why don't I hang on? If I can find it, even though it's in German, if you like Hot Toys, you can actually see his reviews are fun anyway, because you can see what figure he's reviewing, and what's great about his stuff is that you can actually see close-ups. He does a really good job of shooting close-ups of the figures, which is really nice. I mean, when you're looking at toy reviews, you want to see, first and foremost, you want to see the toy review itself. You want to see the toy. So here I'm going to put a link to his page. Go visit it. Go visit his page. Go subscribe and like. So there you go, Patrick. Keep up those reviews. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, with all the money and prestige associated with the Lord of the Rings series on Amazon, can you explain to me why they picked two more or less uncredited showrunners? Apparently they are uncredited writers for some modern Star Trek and not much more. Good question. Maybe I would only assume that their pitch or whatever they said or whatever the materials they came up with were quite impressive. So maybe they know their Tolkien and they came in with a great pitch. Obviously, the show is about the Second Age, where Fellowship of the Ring begins when you see the first War of the Ring, and it's leading up to that. So maybe they had a good pitch. Vlad Mamat sends in a super chat and says, hey, Rob, heard you've got a horror book in mind. Let me know if you'd like to get an artist or illustrator on board. I happen to be one, and I'm a fan of yours. Yeah, I mean, I me writing a horror novel, that's what I've wanted to write. I've got a horror script I've been noodling with that I could turn into a book, I suppose. Maybe I should. It'd be easier to probably convert it, come up with a story. But, yeah. But I'll keep you in mind, man. I always need artists. Noodles sends in a tip and says, sup, Rob? Noodles here. First time, long time. With the release of HBO Max today, I thought it a good time to bring up the Studio Ghibli collection included with the service. I was watching Kiki's Delivery Service a minute ago, and I had to stop and say something about this music. Check out these movies for composer Joe Hisashi alone. I feel he isn't brought up enough as one of our greats. What's your favorite Studio Ghibli film? Thanks. Ooh. I really love Howl's Moving Castle. I mean, I really do. But I liked early stuff. I like Nausicaa and My Neighbor Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service. But, when they started coming to America, like with Princess Mononoke, it was great. But I do, Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle are really good. They're really good. But again, Howl's Moving Castle, literally on legs. I love that. And yes, the music for the Studio Ghibli movies is great. Stub McShave sends in a tip and says, I'm surprised that the high temperatures in Siberia isn't a bigger news item. Normally they have freezing temperatures this time of year. This year they have temperatures at 25 Celsius, which is about 77 degrees Fahrenheit, which may cause the release of captured methane gas in the frozen tundra. Yeah, you know what? I mean, we're going to learn, whether you believe in global warming or whether you think it's man-made or not, it's happening. And it's going to be on everybody's mind, and we're all going to say the same thing. Why didn't we do something earlier? Well, because we didn't want to. We knew. So, anyway, what can I say? That's really scary. Jeffrey Mao is here, and he says, I was watching The Joker 4K. They knew what it took to get plenty of people to not only want to wear a mask, but think it's cool. One theory as to why Asians are more okay with wearing masks is Asian superhero masks cover the bottom part of the face, whereas Western superhero masks usually cover from the nose up. Think Batman, Captain America, etc. On the other hand, think of ninja masks. Oh, I know. But also when you're in Asian countries too, there are people walking around with masks on all the time. I mean, I noticed that when I was in South Korea back in 2018. There were people wearing masks. You know, they know if they're sick, they don't want to get you sick. It's such a weird, like I was watching this video of this guy. If somebody sent me the video, I don't remember his name. He's been doing comic book videos, but he was bitching about going to the comic book store and wearing a mask because he's saying it doesn't matter, you know, social distancing. 1 in 100,000 people died where I live, so what does it matter? It's like, well, you know, is it really that hard to wear a mask for the time being until, hey, there's a vaccine or we tamp down the virus? I mean, it's so weird to me that the idea that you could be a carrier of COVID-19 and be asymptomatic and not even know you're a carrier and get other people sick. Why not, for the time being, just wear a mask when you go out? Or I read a screed that Ted Nugent wrote about, you're curtailing my, you know, if you don't want to go out, don't go out. Why should I have to wear a mask when I go out? And it's like, well, you know, right now the pandemic is real, and gosh, now we've gotten to the point where people, it's only 100,000 people dead. I mean, what does it matter? They were going to die anyway. They were old. They had underlying symptoms and all this. It's amazing to me how we normalize this kind of behavior. It's very weird, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I mean, I don't know. I can't help it. I don't know. Vlad Momont sends in a super chat and says, also, I'm working on a world's finest. By the way, I have it's quarter scale figure of Kamen Rider, who was one of the first Japanese superheroes, and he's awesome. So Vlad says, also working on a world's finest story pitch, entwining Soups and Bat's career origins in a contemporary story, going for a Zemeckis and Wright feel. That's cool. That sounds good. I'd watch that. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, hi, Rob, is it possible that the collapse of Game of Thrones and therefore any sequels made the need for the Snyder Cut, love saying that, necessary? Especially after Westworld lost its way in the 3rd season. If so, D&D really did a solid for Zach. You know, I don't think so. I think the only way to win the streaming wars is to have new content. This is prestige, A-list content that they could get. Even if it costs them $70 million to get this, it's not necessarily A-list prices. They're getting a prestige thing that no one's ever seen. If you really are going to get a 4-hour version of Justice League, that's certainly something no one's ever seen before. And I think it's a win-win situation for everybody. But I don't think it's necessarily related to Thrones. Because remember, Game of Thrones went out on a very high note in terms of people watching. Ultimately, I hate to say this, but when you've got your ratings, whether something's good or bad doesn't really matter. Well, because yes, you have ratings. So, I mean, that they had that and it worked for them. And whether we love it or not is sort of immaterial because people watched. Vlad also says, may I just recommend a great suspense horror drama movie called Cold Skin about a rather mad Ray Stevenson on a lighthouse. Somewhat Lovecraftian, too. It sounds good to me, especially after The Lighthouse. I will watch other Lighthouse movies because why not? I have letters. I do have letters. So, let's see. I'm just going to jump into reading letters because I have like a lot of them today. And this one I'm going to read. This is Christopher McCulloch's letter. I'm going to read this on Whining About Movies tonight. So there you go, Christopher. I'm going to save that for Whining About Movies. This movie comes from Tari E. Hi, Rob. Sorry, this is going to be a rambling rant. I mostly wanted to share this article written on Hypable recently by Leilani Safer. She appears to be one of the few online journalists without an irrational hatred against Zack Snyder and his fans. She fights back against some of the more negative recent articles which have been published recently. Okay, I'm going to put her article here. I don't understand, why would anybody hate Zack Snyder? That's kind of weird. I guess if you don't like his Superman or something, which I like. I mean, I don't get it, but okay. Here's the article that you're talking about. I put that in the live chat. There's a similar video by Clownfish TV which highlights some of the same points and the overall hypocrisy in the online media in regards to being toxic, as they love to claim. And I'm going to put that article in here too, so you can read it. I'll tell you something when it comes to just, here we go. As an aside, so I was posting on my friend Jim Cole's Facebook page about the situation that happened in New York with the woman and the dog and the guy, the bird watcher, the African-American bird watcher who was filming her, and all of that fallout that's been in the news over the last couple of days. And I'll tell you, so I went on there and I said what I found really disturbing to me about the whole thing is when the woman made the call to the police, she put on an act. So not only was she making sure that the police knew there's an African-American man after me, she was also like, I'm a woman, but also played the part of this defenseless, cowering woman. And what I was so shocked about is she wasn't just lying to the police. She was creating an entire narrative for them so they would show up that was complete fabrication. And she was using the fact that she was a woman, and she was also, not only did she use African American as a stereotype, meaning crime or she was being threatened, but she also put on the stereotype that she was this demure woman who was being threatened by a man. So she was treading on multiple stereotypes. And I was unfortunate to use the word believe all women. Here was a woman who was right in front of our eyes crafting a false narrative to get somebody in trouble deliberately. And it was really shocking to watch from my perspective, because what if the police came? We all know what our culture is like. You think they're not going to believe her after the story she just spun? I mean, complete fabrication. And I couldn't help but think, like, what if this woman was in a custody suit with, say, her husband, if she had any kids? Would she make up abuse allegations against her husband? I mean, she was shown right there on camera that at the drop of a hat, she was ready to not only accuse somebody, but completely lie and make up a story where she jumped into playing a part. Like, oh, woe is me. She changed her voice. So I was making this point, and then all the people jumped out at me. Were like, how can you equate this to believe all women and all this? And I'm like, well, that wasn't my point. I wasn't trying to denigrate all women, but I was saying that here was a situation where we watched a woman straight up lie and fabricate something. And then I was accused of being a right-winger. All these people piled on me, and my response was, what do you think about what happened in this particular instance? What do you think about what you see in this video? And by the end of this conversation that I was really curious what people really thought, because I was responding to a very long, thoughtful post by my friend Jim. By the end of it, they had no interest. All they were doing was, all they wanted to do was insult me, and ultimately, on my Twitter feed, when I say that I'm an aging man-child, they came back and threw that in my face. And I'm like, what about what we were discussing? Do you have any thoughts about it? And to me, it was a perfect example of watching toxicity. They're going after me. Obviously, I guess that felt better. than coming up with any kind of cogent response to what I was saying. They just immediately saw me as an enemy and vilified me, and then just didn't listen to anything that I was saying. And it was a perfect example of what online toxicity to me is. They painted me with a brush, and I'm like, that's not what I was saying at all. I mean, accusing me of being a right-winger and having talking points, and I'm just like, wow. Pardon me, I didn't mean to stop in the middle of your letter, Tari. I watch quite a lot of films, and I've interviewed people in the industry. I do like most Zack Snyder's films for the most part, and I truly appreciate his style. I think there are definitely filmmakers I like more than him, but he's the one I find myself discussing the most or defending the most online, only because of the truly disgusting backlash against him, which I don't understand. It doesn't really make sense. A lot of his creatives often go out of their way to compliment how nice he is, too. So it's not as if he's done anything controversial to deserve so much ire. Oh, no. Zack Snyder did the most controversial thing ever. He made a Superman movie that comic book readers, some of them at least, rejected, which might be the worst crime of all. But look, that kind of toxicity in fan circles, and it is. I mean, look, if you want to complain about someone's work, that's one thing. But to go after them personally when clearly they're only trying to do the best they can, I object to, and it's not like he's not working in the parameters that have been established in multiple Superman comics. I have the problem with Star Trek when they want to go change Star Trek into something that it's not. That's different. I don't think Zack Snyder was doing that at all. I mean, you loved his 300. Talk about slavish devotion to the source material. Watchmen was also slavishly devoted to the source material. I know all too well in life that when a self-proclaimed authority or a majority try to belittle or push back against you, you do in turn have the urge to fight back in defense as hard as you can. I believe that's what people are seeing, not toxicity. And since they are so dismissive, uncaring, and pretty callous about it all, they repeatedly just bash Snyder and his fans quite a lot. I think there's something to that. And personally, I'm not a white guy or American myself, and most people I interact with who like Snyder aren't really either. So it always rubs me the wrong way when people try and pin all Snyder fans or paint all Snyder fans with the same brush as stereotypical right-wing white guys. All sorts of people like all sorts of things and shouldn't be attacked for doing so. Anyway, I won't go into too much more. Thanks. Sorry, Tari. Well, Tari, look, man, I'm with you 100%. I got tarred and feathered on just having a conversation about something that happened when I was really looking. And these people don't know me. And one of them is definitely an imagination connoisseur who was doing this. And he was the most dismissive. And I'm like, why would you treat me this way? I mean, it's really interesting that this guy started coming after me. And I finally said, well, if you have nothing to say about this and you just want to come after me personally, good day, sir. We don't have anything more to talk about. But there's a lot of that, online. And that kind of behavior is kind of everywhere. But what are you going to do? This next letter is from Ezekiel McAdams. Hi, Rob. This is my second letter. I wanted to thank you again. I've been catching up on past Robservations these 2 weeks, and it was your recent Quibi rant from the New York Times piece featuring Jeffrey Katzenberg's deflections that gave me some much-needed levity. My grandmother passed away on Mother's Day after a week of not eating or drinking. She was 91 years old, and as you can imagine, it was gutting to not be able to see her during her final days. I'm very sorry to hear that. I assume many grandchildren will say that their grandma was the best, but mine truly was. She was warm, supportive, compassionate, funny, and accepting even when she didn't understand what I was excited about during that particular day. My favorite moments of hers will always be our conversations, taking me to plays and saying fiddlesticks while reacting to whatever was happening on the road, or calling me McDuff in response to one of my antics. I would love to have heard her say those things. As you can imagine, I love McDuff. That's hysterical. That was hysterical. As you can imagine, the last 3 weeks have been very hard for me and my family, so your rant about Quibi from the New York Times was the first full-bellied guffaw that I had in weeks. Like you, I too am obsessed with Quibi, whether it fails or manages to crawl its way up from obscurity. See, I don't want it to fail like you. I want to just see what happens. What's going on with my Quibi today? I'm in my 30s, and I've been on YouTube since its inception, and while I'm Canadian, have subscriptions to most of the streaming services: Netflix, Amazon Prime, CBS All Access, Disney+, YouTube Premium, even the Canadian offering Crave that amalgamates most of HBO's original content and movie packages. Isn't that where Letterkenny came from? Oh my God, do I love that show. Because of my job as a freelance writer, I signed up for Quibi's unheard of 90-day free trial and was underwhelmed, to say the least. As I've mentioned, as someone who's in the demographic of a millennial, watching high quality only on your phone is a turnoff. What Katzenberg and Meg Whitman seem to not understand or be oblivious to is that, yes, a large conglomerate of people will watch YouTube, Vine, Pods, or now TikTok on their phones when they have spare seconds. But how many people say, I'm going to watch this Netflix movie or The Mandalorian on my phone? The answer? No one. I think if the Quibi team had done any research, they would have found people preferring options like being able to cast it to the TV or different devices, the ability to share said contact with their friends, family, and mutuals on social media. How their team could be so perplexed by this development is staggering. However, I must admit I was surprised. I do enjoy a lot of Quibi's first offerings. I quite enjoyed the bonkers Bananas cooking show, Dishmantled, starring Titus Burgess, from the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, where chefs have 20 minutes to replicate a dish that was fired at them from a cannon. It was funny and perfectly suited to Quibi's format at 5 to 8 minutes, where it never overstayed its welcome. I also quite enjoyed Murder Flip House, where home decorators have to flip homes that have the stigma of being famous or infamous crime scenes. Or The Shape of Pasta, where LA chef Evan Funke travels to Italy to preserve dying pasta shapes from various villages and nooks and crannies in Italy. In terms of scripted originals, the series When the Streetlights Go On was enjoyable as a summer teen mystery whodunit, but ultimately beholden to its format, which is jarring as some episodes are quite boring and don't give much reason to return. As a horror fan, I really enjoyed the horror anthology by Sam Raimi, 50 States of Fright, where each horror story takes place in a different U.S. state. I particularly enjoyed the Ball of Twine episode featuring Karen Allen from the Indiana Jones films. Personally, I feel Quibi would have made more of a splash had it given users more options. Options such as to binge the entire series or movie, the ability to cast different devices, and to share meme-worthy moments on social media. I was too young for New Coke, but I think your analogy is apt, and Katzenberg will continue to be perplexed at Quibi's lack of status. Anyway, sorry for the long rant. I just wanted to say I'm with you on the Quibi fascination, and thank you again for your rant, which provided some much-needed levity in a dark time. Ezekiel, the Canadian who wishes he lived on Mars. One day, son. One day. Eric Gant writes in. Eric says, Greetings, Rob, and hello to all the imagination connoisseurs out there. I'd like to start by saying thank you for devoting so much time and energy into creating so much interesting, entertaining, and oftentimes thought-provoking content. Over the past year or so, my view of you has transformed from that conceited dude who I saw on a random Collider video to that insightful, articulate, and creative dude who likes the same stuff I like and who has created my all-time favorite YouTube channel. Well, that's quite the journey I've taken, but thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you feel that way. I wonder what Collider appearance you're talking about. I mean, if it's the Schmodown, I definitely understand. I mean, a lot of people who watch me in the Schmodown do not get, like, when they come here, they're like, wait, what? You are an artiste, sir. To borrow your words, we park our shuttles in the same shuttle bay. The reason I'm writing is a story you posted a link to on Twitter. Oh, this is the same story about the woman. It disturbed me, mildly at first, but it festered. I found my mind repeatedly going back to it as though it was an itching scab or an irritating Band-Aid. This letter is my attempt to rip that Band-Aid off. In the story, a lady was allowing her dog to roam freely in an area that requires dogs to be leashed. A man insisted that she leash her dog, and the two became involved in a heated discussion. The man, wisely in my opinion, began filming the interaction, which the woman objected to. The woman, who happens to be white, approached the man, who's black, and informed him that if he didn't stop filming her, she would call the police and claim that an African-American man was threatening her life. I know, that's what she said, threatening her life. Let's set aside the fact that this was a lie, which is disturbing on its own, and look at the wording she chose. An African-American man is threatening my life. Talk about playing the race card. The lady obviously believes that the race of the man will impact the urgency with which the police will respond, and she understands the implied level of force that might be involved in that response. Also, don't forget, she's playing the woman as victim card. Stay with me here. She's basically threatening to have the man killed if he doesn't submit to her demands. An exaggeration? I don't think so. Sadly, there are still people, some of them in police uniforms, who associate black man with threat. This lady is weaponizing this fact as surely as if she herself were pulling out a gun and pointing it at his head. I agree with you 100% about this. The story brought to mind an incident I experienced during my college years. While some of my memories of back then have grown hazy with time, this one remains crystal clear and as sharp as a shard of broken glass. In the early 90s, I was a bit of a fitness buff. My daily routine included an early morning run on the track at the university's stadium. I put on my running clothes, toss my student ID, Walkman, keys, and water bottle into my backpack, and leave the dorm at 6 a.m., rain or shine, to hit the track. One morning, as I neared the stadium, I heard someone behind me say, "Excuse me, sir." I turned to see a lady police officer approaching me. My initial thought was, she's kind of cute, coupled with a feeling of mild irritation at having my routine disturbed. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. The officer informed me that this was just a routine stop and asked where I was heading and what I had in my backpack. My irritation growing, I replied I was a student here and that I was heading to the track. All I had in my backpack was my keys, my Walkman, and my water bottle. "Do you have any ID?" she asked. Irritation mounting, I simply replied yes and reached into my backpack to retrieve it. "Freeze! Put down the backpack and step away from it." Confused and startled by the urgency of her response, I glanced up to see her hand planted firmly on her gun. Rob, this might sound corny or cliche, but it's true. At that moment, I felt like time was suddenly and truly slowing down to a halt. It was the closest I've ever come to an out-of-body experience. I felt like I was a third party watching the encounter. She thought I had a weapon in my backpack, and in the next few moments, I might actually die. I experienced a profound shift in how I viewed myself, the world around me, and how that world viewed me. This wasn't just mild irritation or convenience, and I wasn't just a regular dude who happened to be black, and also happened to dig Star Wars and Star Trek. I wasn't just a geeky military brat trying to figure out what my major would be and how best to approach the cute chick in sociology class. I wasn't just a guy going out for a run. I was also a potential threat. I always had been and always would be. And the wrong move at the wrong time could mean getting killed. This next bit is kind of a bit embarrassing. By the way, I want to say that, this is something people have to understand when they talk about, privilege, or whether they talk about whatever. That as somebody who is a black man, a black woman in this society, if I went and took my backpack off and reached into it, I'm sure a cop would not, especially after she had asked me to do so to get my ID, if I then had my backpack, which is all I'm carrying on me, and I'm sure you were in sweats, so you didn't exactly maybe have pockets or whatever. You had your backpack. What else are you going to do? There was no threat there. You're having a conversation. She asked you to do this, and you're doing what you were asked to do. I'll bet if you weren't black, she wouldn't have pulled the gun. And I think that's, until she doesn't pull the gun, there's never going to be equality in our world. And I've talked about, I walk into a convenience store at 2 o'clock in the morning, whether I want to use the ATM, get a Diet Coke if I'm going home. I never have to worry. But a black man does. Black man walks into a 7-Eleven at 2 o'clock in the morning. You never know. Somebody's thinking twice. And someone is perceiving something that they maybe shouldn't. Even if we're the same people, we're both going to get, I don't know, I got a girl in the car I picked up at a club. I'm out of toothpaste. I stop at a 7-Eleven. Who knows? You just don't know. But anyway, And I was just a regular dude who happened to be black, who also happened to dig Star Wars and Star Trek. I wasn't just a geeky military brat trying to figure out what my major would be and how best to approach the cute chick in sociology class. I had always had been and always will be. I was a potential threat, and the one wrong move at the wrong time could mean getting killed. This next bit is kind of embarrassing, but fuck it. I actually found myself tearing up. Up until that moment, I'd allowed myself to be lulled into a sense of, for lack of a better word, belonging. You see, my school was very progressive and very liberal. It was a liberal environment. I had friends of different races, different religions, and from different countries. Despite this, we were all the same in all the ways that mattered. We all loved our friends and family. We all dreamed of going out and making our mark in the world, and eventually finding that special someone to settle down with. We studied together, we partied together, and we all gathered together every week to watch the latest episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Sure, I'd had my encounters with closed-minded people. It's a regular part of growing up black in America, or Asian, or Hispanic, or as a member of any minority group. But at this point in my life, I'd come to the conclusion that we were evolving past all that. I felt like we as a species were actually approaching the future depicted in Star Trek. But I didn't belong. To many people around me, I was and would forever be the other. And who were these people who viewed me this way? After all, not all of them wore white hoods or swastikas or name tags that said, "I don't trust or like you." Was it the friend whose CD I borrowed yesterday, or the owner of the local comic shop, or that cute chick in sociology class? This incident was like being doused with a bucket of ice-cold, dirty water. It woke me up and snapped me back to reality. It pissed me off, and I was most definitely afraid. But the dominant emotion I felt was a burning but impotent rage. This was my life, and it could be taken from me right now, and there wasn't a fucking thing that I could do about it. Anyway, I'm rambling. After I stepped away from my backpack, the police officer picked it up and checked it out. She took out my student ID, looked at me, and handed everything back to me. "Sorry about that, sir," she said. "We can't always tell the good guys from the bad guys." I don't know if you'll have a chance to read this letter, but even if you don't, it served its immediate purpose. It has made me feel better to have written it. Once again, thanks for all that you do, Rob. Here's hoping that one day we'll see that utopian future that Star Trek depicted. Eric Gant. Well, Eric, again, everybody surprises me on this show. I think the best part of my day is when I get letters like yours. I want to thank you for writing in. What a great letter. And again, first of all, I don't understand why. I mean, the thing that we witnessed this week with the man being a police officer kneeling on a man's neck, literally killing him. I don't understand. I really don't understand why that kind of force is used. Why are guns pulled? If you're at a university and you're walking to if you're at a university with a backpack, it's probably a good bet that you're a student there. And if you're heading to the track to run around, to be stopped on the way in the morning, no less. I mean, it is, people get up, they go to the gym. You were stopped because of your skin color. And I watched that video. Meghan McCain posted it. And, I kind of, truth be told, I do have a crush on Meghan McCain. I understand a lot of people think that I probably shouldn't, but I have a crush on Meghan McCain. So I follow her on Twitter. So she tweeted this, and it was one of the worst things I've ever seen, to be honest. Watching a man lose his life. Literally, who is begging, "I can't breathe." There are people begging the police to let the guy up. Why couldn't they have let him up? They literally, I just watched a guy straight up get murdered by cops. And, there's a lot of good cops. There's a lot of great police out there. Detective Jim, who's one of the people who moderates my chats, I would assume was also a good cop. But you look at this kind of behavior, when is this kind of conduct ever needed? There's lots of ways. I've worked with law enforcement. I've worked with military. There's lots of ways to detain a suspect, and having a suspect on the ground with your knee on their neck is not something that I'm sure they teach at the police academy, at least not for a routine stop. And it's unbelievable. And what it does is the majority of police that I've met over the course of my life, especially here in LA, have been pretty good people. Hell, I've been to jail. And for the most part, all the authorities I met in that odyssey were pretty good. And I was in LA County. It was rough. Well, maybe I'll tell that story one day. But it was interesting. It was interesting. But what I saw was just horrific. And yeah, I mean, we got to get over these things. But on the other hand, if you look at crime statistics, I understand, but you can't just assume that every single person, especially if you're working at a college. Omar94 is here. He says, "Hi, Rob. I wanted to give you, your moderators, and the viewers 2 movie recommendations, which I like and think are underappreciated. If anyone hasn't seen it, here we go. My first recommendation is a 1945 film noir, but it's in color, called Leave Her to Heaven, starring Gene Tierney from Laura, as well as Vincent Price in a supporting role. My second recommendation is the 1989 dark comedy called War of the Roses, which I saw at the Avco Theater on Wilshire Boulevard in Westwood, with a Romancing the Stone reunion, as it stars Michael Douglas, Kathleen Turner, and Danny DeVito. Those are my 2 recommendations for everyone, Leave Her to Heaven and War of the Roses. Thanks, and live long and prosper." Well, thanks for that, Omar. I have not seen Leave Her to Heaven, but I did see War of the Roses. Thanks for writing in these interesting recommendations. I want to see your physical media collection. This from Twin Flicks. Rob, or as our friends down south say, Roberto. Yesterday you were talking about if the director or the DP or the other people would get paid again. This got me thinking, so I contacted my good friend Tyler, who works on the business side of Hollywood, and he said the following: "No one gets paid again. Maybe the director as extra incentive to help them finish the project, but the pay would be nominal. Just thought it was interesting and a little insider info, and thought you might like to consider. Now for the shameless promotion. We have several interviews in all aspects of filmmaking. Today we're doing one with Justice League and Game of Thrones DP Fabian Wagner. Subscribe to the Twin Flicks podcast here on YouTube to be notified of new content coming out. I also wanted to say hi to my bub Mustard, Twin Flicks." Well, here are things about that. The actors would have to get paid, and perhaps the writers would too, because this is a new deal. And as the guy from HBO talked about, as he said yesterday, they are dealing with contracts with the guilds and the unions. You can't just do this and not pay anybody. This is a separate entity. Justice League came out, it was completed, and that was one thing. This thing that they're making now, this new cut, it's being done for HBO Max. It's a whole new thing. So there are all new considerations to consider. So whether it's talent, at least your actors have a say in it. The director has to be paid for their work. No one works for free. HBO, the budget, if it goes up to, like they said yesterday on that podcast, the head of Warner Media and the head of HBO Max, he said he wished it was going to cost $30 million, as we talked about. People are getting paid. That's why it costs money. And it's a whole new deal. So what I'm curious about is I think this sets an interesting new precedent. So tell your friend he should watch closely what happens with it, because people will have to get paid. Emil Johansson is here. Emil Johansson says, "Hello, Rob. Today I wish to discuss my fandom of the MCU and Chris Evans' Captain America. My theory is that Captain America's character journey is backwards. It starts with his third movie, Civil War, continues with Winter Soldier, and ends with the first Avengers. This is with the first Avenger. This is how I choose to view it, because I hate Civil War as an ending to his trilogy, but watching some YouTube edits of it with all the films, I now believe his story starts with Civil War and ends with the first Avenger, and it actually works for me. Hear me out. His character starts as someone determined on what is right and wrong, what right and wrong is, and he works hardcore to do what he believes is the right thing. This is someone most people can identify with, I think. We all have our perceptions of what good and bad is, even if we disagree on them. We believe our own opinions and fight for them. We disagree on these concepts, hence politics, but we all, I think, agree that we want to do what is right. I see this Steve inside Captain America Civil War. This guy doesn't care what other people think, or seemingly of the consequences for his actions. He just goes straight for what he is determined to do. Doing this, he breaks the Avengers apart, causing rifts with the government and the world, etc., even though he does all this believing he does the right thing. He is very naive, kind of like a child. That's the first act of his character. He's flawed, yet he isn't a bad person. The second act is Winter Soldier. Now he's more confused as to what the right thing is. He has seen the consequences of his actions, and even though he knows what he wanted to do, the right thing, he knows his actions were destructive and not very thought through, and this is his character in Winter Soldier. A confused person open to the idea that good can be interpreted and is not necessarily a fixed idea. The conclusion of this arc is that he no longer cares for high political ideals or deep religions or whatever. He cares about what the basics are, which is protecting his friend Bucky. That's something people can understand universally, and it may not be a big deal to the world, but it's a big deal to him, and it's something relatable. Now comes the final act, First Avenger. This Steve has now lost everything of value, and he has what he fought for, which is Bucky. He doesn't have a girlfriend, he doesn't have friends, he doesn't have an important job or whatever. He has nothing. What he wants is not to be world famous or whatever anymore. His goals are not huge. All he has is a simplistic and basic goal. He wants to do what's right. Coming back to the first thought from the first part, he just wants to do what's right, but this time he's learned from his mistakes, and he isn't as radical as he was. He also lost all his power. He doesn't need a huge organization or whatever. He only leads himself. This is what makes him worthy. Now he understands the values of the basics in life, and just getting a girl at the end is a big deal, and he's not sacrificing other people's lives as a leader for doing what he believes to be right. He has gone from a great man to a good man, and this is when he truly becomes Captain America, someone that goes from good to great because he is good and not because he is great. He isn't super smart and he isn't all-knowing, but he fights for what he believes in on his own terms, and that's what makes him a true hero. I hope that made sense. I could explain it better if I thought about it more, but the only way Captain America's trilogy works for me is if I look at it backwards now. He becomes a better person if you travel backwards in time, and his end is the first Avenger, not Civil War. He makes progress the more back you go. Thanks for reading my letter. I hope I didn't spell anything incorrectly too much. Here's the thing. While I think that's interesting, my problem with what you're saying is that, in the first Avenger, he's young and he's idealistic because he's never had his beliefs tested. It's easy to be young and idealistic when the world hasn't had its way with you. And I think the thing about Captain America is he does retain his goodness, and he doesn't get jaded. He doesn't give up. He could walk away after discovering the truth of Hydra, which he does not do. He continues to fight. And to me, where he begins in Captain America, the First Avenger, he's naive. And even the villains are very cut and dried. The Nazis were a very cut and dried bunch of villains. They needed to be stopped. They were evil. Yes, we will stop them. But what happens when you find out that the people that you thought you believed in, it turns out that they're corrupt and they're horrible? How do you fight those people? And Captain America continued to fight on. And remember, even after Civil War, it was Captain America, through all of these experiences, through the crucibles that he had to survive or endure, it got to the point where they shaped him and pressured the pressure and everything that he went through. Look what happens. He winds up worthy of holding Mjolnir at the end battle against Thanos. And I would say that all of the things that he went through, the Captain America and Captain America, the First Avenger, could never have wielded Mjolnir. It never would have happened. He had not become worthy. He had proven himself worthy. And by going through everything he went through and maintaining his sense of right and wrong and who he was, that's what made him worthy of wielding Thor's hammer. And I think that's really important when it comes to that story. But it's an interesting take. Definitely something to think about. Thomas Ed has written in, O-E-D, Ed, I think Ed. Hey, Rob, I'm a relatively new fan of you and your shows, and I've really been enjoying your coverage. We seem to be around the same age, and we coincidentally both moved to California in 1988, me to San Diego, where I still reside. I discovered your channel around the time of your coverage of Star Trek Picard and sympathized completely with your reaction. I remember you saying something along the lines of having a harsh reaction to how dark and violent everything was. The word that came to my mind was actually betrayal. I feel that this new Star Trek crew has betrayed the amazing legacy of Star Trek that so many of us cherish. I've also listened to a few of the Elizaviews episodes, and I really got a kick out of you both reviewing Body Double, which for me made quite an impression in my coming-of-age years. And who can ever forget Frankie's anthem, Relax? Completely blended with the film. Genius. It was fun being reminded of that quirky film that I now need to find and watch again. Anyway, I want to keep this somewhat brief, so I'll finish it with my most important point. I was really touched yesterday by your nod to your father on Memorial Day. It was quite timely for me, and it really hit home. My own father was not a veteran, fortunately, too young to fight in World War II. Fortunate because he'd have to fight for the other side. Oh, dope! As it happens, I will now forever think of him on Memorial Day because just this past Sunday evening, he suffered a heart attack and he passed away in the early hours of Monday. I'm very sorry to hear that. He lived a long and happy life, and I'm glad he got to go out in the way he had hoped for, not suffering from a long, drawn-out, painful, and debilitating illness like he'd had to watch my mom endure 25 years ago. Hearing you pay tribute to your dad, just as I'm in the middle of processing my own dad's passing, was oddly poignant and comforting. Thanks for providing a now familiar and friendly voice, and helping us all to immerse ourselves in those things that all of us in the Post-Geek Singularity have so much passion for. Here's to much continued success to you and your channel. Best regards, Thomas. Wow, I don't know what to say. I mean, you know, it's such a strange thing when I come here and talk about this stuff on YouTube. Much of the time, because I can't see anybody, it's hard to know how people are taking you. Like, I just assume a lot of my friends frown on this. They don't understand it. Or, I mean, I do get enough guff that's the perception. But when I hear a letter like yours, Thomas, and the previous letter that I read, I mean, I can't. It's really amazing. I mean, you just never know. You never know when, and I'm constantly amazed when people write me and they tell me that I have said something that made them feel better. I mean, that's I guess that's really the highest praise that you can get, really. So thank you very much. This next one comes from David Miller. Good day to you, Robert. I'm going to start this letter off by apologizing in advance for its clumsiness. It's late and I'm tired and I really should get to sleep, but I have to get this out of my system. You've mentioned in the past how the menace that is the Borg had its teeth pulled, one by one, with each successive appearance in Star Trek The Next Generation. You've recorded the downward spiral of this once awe-inspiring threat to the galaxy in Robservations, and I agree with virtually all of your assessments. For me, however, the bottom dropped out of the Borg train at their zenith with the best of both worlds. A little early, you might say? Well, not for me, because it was the end of that two-parter where Data totally spanked the Borg. As you recall, Data was infiltrating the Borg's neural network and encountering no resistance. When they finally did realize his incursion and employed countermeasures against Data, those measures were laughably shrugged off by the alabaster android. It was at this point where I realized Data could defeat the Borg single-handedly, rendering the entire drama empty. They could have dropped him into the Borg cube and let him be hooked up to the collective, and he could have turned them off from the inside. And that's when the Borg lost their mojo in my eyes. With this Achilles heel established in the television series, it made the events of First Contact even more baffling. When they hooked Data up to their kiosk and engineering, he should have just owned them right then and there, and based on previous encounters. Well, that's it. I just had to get that off my chest. I guess it's another indicator that Star Trek works best in its weekly niche on the small screen, supported by a moderate but loyal fan base, not as a cinema-dominating franchise. Be well, David. Yeah, you know, I don't think you're wrong there, buddy. I think that there's a real problem. There's a real problem with that, and I definitely agree. And they've neutered the Borg. They continued to neuter them, and yeah, when that's happened once, how come it didn't happen again? You know, why couldn't they have done that a number of times? Who knows? Yeah, it's a little odd. This one comes from Keith O'Neill. Hey, Rob. Saw the newest Robservations, Season 2, Episode number 426, and I agree completely with you regarding who is to blame for the theatrical cut of Justice League. I'm in the camp the blame is squarely on Warner Brothers. An underreported fact about the movie is that after Batman v Superman hit theaters, Warner Brothers demanded Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio rewrite the script to Justice League just a few weeks before shooting began. I also never blamed Joss Whedon. Any director who came into the situation he walked into reportedly began working in May of 2017, and it needed to be completely done and ready to show by November of 2017. It was going to fail no matter how hard they tried. They essentially asked Whedon to do a year's worth of work in 4 months. That's true. If the alleged rumor is indeed true that the former head of Warner Brothers didn't move Justice League's release date because of the bonus he'd get before the AT&T merger, despite all the extensive reshoots the movie required, then the movie was doomed from the get-go. Thanks, Keith O'Neill. Well, Keith, yeah, I mean, I've heard that, and that AT&T stuff, it ain't show friends, it's show business. And I understand. And Sujihara was also having some kind of a weird little affair. Some weird stuff was going on, and that's kind of strange. So, hey, All Metal Mike is here and sends in a super chat and says, "Rob, I sent you a couple of posts. One by carrier pigeon, which might take a few days. The others I sent by email and should be there momentarily." Well, Mike, all right. Well, here's one that you sent me. "Rob, good day to you, and thank you for all you are and all you do." Well, I thank you for that. "Rob, as I look around the world, I see a common problem among people, which I believe is caused by an unseen enemy. When I think about this enemy, I can't help but think of the Star Trek original series episode entitled Day of the Dove from the 3rd season. In this episode, there's a force that brings together the Enterprise and a Klingon ship for the sole purpose of having them fight and destroy each other. Kirk saves everyone when he realizes that the enemy is not the Klingons, but this manipulating force that feeds off the hate between the two sides. And that force won't let them destroy each other. He'll just keep bringing them back. In today's world, one could make the analogy that social media is the equivalent of this Star Trek malevolent force. It brings people together and then grows when they snipe at each other, hate each other, and continue to battle, all the while being consumed by hatred. The malevolent force of social media just sits back and laughs, continuing to grow unseen, while one by one people are destroyed. Where is our Captain Kirk to wake up the world and make us laugh at each other so the malevolent force weakens and dies? Anyway, those are my thoughts, and I would love to hear those of yours and your viewers." Well, I think ultimately social media has probably done more good than bad. Again, it hasn't been around very long, and we're going through an evolutionary period about what we're going to do with it. I think ultimately people are just going to get tired. I already know people that watch this channel write me all the time, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so tired of the hatred, and they come to this channel because at least, I've always got a smile on my face, and I'm like, hey, isn't this awesome? I mean, we were about to watch 2 Americans be launched from a privately built rocket in association with NASA to an international space station today. How cool is that? Like, that's the height of coolness. And it is opening the age of commercial human spaceflight, which can only push the bounds of our understanding of where we're at. And I think it's really, really, really exciting. So all this hatred, I mean, I think the real problem that, the way I see it, I mean, and maybe this is my snobbish privilege, is that, I don't think a lot of people are satisfied in their lives, and hate is satisfying. It's easy because, if you want to start a project, like if you want to write a book or, whatever you want to do, whatever the thing is that you want to do, it takes a long time. And you want to quit. Like, writing a book is no easy undertaking, and it's hard, and then you want it to be good. And there's a lot of people that just won't do it. But I'll tell you something, there is something gratifying when you start a project and finish it. And I just think a lot of people in the world don't ever know what that joy is. It's not up to the world at large to give you a living. It's up to you. When I say living, I don't mean necessarily money. I'm saying a living a good life. Everybody gets, I love this from the Sandman, everybody gets a life. That's all they're promised. You get a life. That's enough. You got a life. What are you going to do with it? It seems old and like, that's like you hear that when you're in the 3rd grade or when you're 3. But a lot of people don't even know how to do that. Literally, it's a skill. Like, how do I dream something up and then execute that dream? I mean, that's something we should also be teaching people to do because it's a skill. It's learned behavior. And I think a lot of people don't learn that. I mean, you've got to teach people that they can actually act on their dreams. Like, for whatever reason, like, I never doubted, like I've never doubted anything that I wanted to do in my life. I always knew that, well, if I found the right people, you could pretty much accomplish anything that within reason. Like if I want to go land on Mars, obviously there's a little technological and actual manufacturing that would preclude that. I can't, I can't do that. But you know, like making a movie, get your friends and was it Mark Borchers, the guy who made American movie? They made the documentary about Coven. I mean, you know, I grew up. I guess maybe my parents instilled this in me, or watching Star Trek instilled this in me. It was always like, well, if you think it up, you can go do it. Go do it. Why not? But there's a lot of people that were not brought up that way, and they don't know. They don't even know that. I've told the story about being in Bulgaria and the woman that ran the bar where I was staying, who her and her boyfriend, I bring them to the parties and stuff like that. And when she said to me that she wanted to open her own place, and I said, that's great, you should do that. And she told me that nobody in Bulgaria would ever say that. Everyone would be like, you can't do that. I mean, there was always the old joke about the French sitting around talking about going to space. Is that French would be like, why do you want to do that? We can sit at a cafe and smoke and drink some more wine. You know, I mean, how do you learn to do those things? I don't know, but I think it would make people less angry. Because when people are focused on actually doing a task or making things or following their dreams or whatever, then they're less angry because they're doing something. And I think that we need more of that. You know, and if you're not doing something, maybe it's easier and more seductive to fall in with groups. Paul Stutz is here. Paul Stutz says, hey, Rob, I enjoy watching you on John Campia's show as well as your own Robservations. I've heard you say several times you were disappointed by the Justice League movie that came out and wanted to hear your detailed review of the movie, but I can't find any YouTube videos regarding that review. Can you point me in the direction of your review? I have also purchased a copy of your free Enterprise video. Great job. I was just curious as to the specifics of your opinion of the movie. I never did any kind of in-depth review of Justice League. I thought everything about it was lackluster. From how the mother boxes were utilized, I didn't like the depiction of Steppenwolf or Darkseid. I thought the plot was pretty anemic, and it had no sense of wonder to me. That's just off the top of my head. Admittedly, I only saw it once, and I probably should go revisit it and do a. It'll be interesting because, you know, I'll save it though, because I am definitely going to review it when the Snyder Cut comes out in 2021. If I'm still doing this show, hopefully I'll be off somewhere making a movie. But if I'm still doing this show, I'll definitely. Well, I'm always going to do this show in some way, shape, or form. But I want to come back and do a compare and contrast review. But until then, I probably won't get really in depth into it. Ray Sight is here. Ray Sight Madrid is here. Thanks for reading my first letter, Rob. You got my name right. Its name's pronounced as Ray Sight. Greetings once again to you, your family, and fellow imagination connoisseurs. I mentioned Marie Kondo last time, and an additional thing on that. If we learn to let go of our junk, they eventually go back to us, just like love. Ha. Anyway, everyone is talking about the Snyder Cut, and it seems there's no real love for Justice League 2017. I, for one, consider it not that bad. It seems the reviews painted a much more negative picture, which in my opinion was Disney's shrewd tactics. They did bury X-Men in the comics when they didn't own Fox. However, I haven't seen anyone from the channel I follow give it a positive remark. Just like the letter sender who wrote the Star Wars prequel was akin to adolescence. You know anyone who doesn't fall in love with an older girl? Here is a key that made me appreciate Justice League. I would like to believe that Joss Whedon paid tribute to Zack and his daughter, Lois Lane's inability to work parallel Zack's feelings at the time. And when asked by Lois how to describe Superman's experience with death, he answers, itchy, which a reply me or my daughter would give. And because of that, I like the movie. Then again, I might just be a DC fan and less forgiving. Anyway, hope you have a better day. Well, Ray Sight, thanks for writing in. I just thought the movie was it was lackluster, and I wanted it to be good. I really did. I was so excited to see it, and it wasn't good, and it really bugged me, and I was bummed. Let's see. A letter from Stubble McShave, ladies and gentlemen, is here. Hi, Rob. I recently watched through the original Star Wars films and was struck by a fact. There are two very different tones in the Star Wars movies. Episode 4 and 5 have a much more mature feel than what some of the tone of Episode 6 is. Oh, amen. Whenever we feature Luke's story in Episode 6, there's much more serious of a tone. When we follow Han and Leia's storyline, the feel and tone of the movie is much more flippant and seems to be directed towards children. There's very little suspense in the part of the movie that centers on Han, Leia, and Chewie. Those parts, at least to me, lack in verisimilitude. The more serious movies still have funny moments, and those moments are more funny since they come from a more serious situation, such as Han trying to talk to the guards over the communicator in Episode 4, or when he's cock-blocked by C-3PO in Episode 5. While watching Jedi, I found a very short, 3 seconds long scene that illustrates the tone, and I want you to lift that scene out of the movie and imagine it in the other Star Wars movies. In fact, this is something that the whole Post-Geek Singularity can do. Hey, Willow, put down that slice of pineapple pizza. Hey, Vesna, stop imagining Rob naked. Jim, I know you're a former police officer, but you need to put that donut down and pay attention. All right? The short scene I'm thinking of is Chewbacca swinging on a rope, yelling a Tarzan yell. Focus on that short scene. Do you have it firmly in your mind? Good. Now imagine putting that scene in the different Star Wars movies, and imagine if you feel that it fits with the tone of either movie, or if it just feels out of place. Post-Geek Singularity, get ready. You can comment in the chat with the episode and thumbs up if it fits the tone, or thumbs down if it doesn't fit the tone of the movie. If it fits, in my estimate, a movie that's primarily directed at children. If it doesn't fit, it's not primarily directed towards children. Rob, feel free to give your own opinion on the matter. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Now you answer with 1 for the episode number and thumbs up or thumbs down. It means that it fits the tone of the movie. Up means it fits the tone of the movie. Down means that it doesn't. So does Chewie swinging and giving a Tarzan yell, does it belong in The Phantom Menace? Thumbs up or thumbs down? I think the scene with Tarzan yelling Chewbacca fits with the tone of this movie, which means that it's a movie primarily aimed at children. Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Does Chewie swinging on a vine giving a Tarzan yell belong in a movie like Attack of the Clones or not? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Actually, I think Tarzan yelling at Chewbacca, I think the Tarzan yelling Chewbacca fits with some parts of this movie. If it fits at places such as some parts in the arena and at the droid factory, but other than that, I thought it doesn't fit with the tone. Now we come to Revenge of the Sith. Does the Tarzan yelling Chewbacca fit in Revenge of the Sith? Could it fit in Revenge of the Sith? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. In this movie, the tone of an inserted Chewie Tarzan doesn't fit. What about Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope? Does a Tarzan yelling Chewie fit in A New Hope? I don't think an inserted Tarzan Chewie scene would fit anywhere in this movie. Imagine a Tarzan Chewie scene swinging over the chasm directly after Luke and Leia does their swing. No, it doesn't fit with the tone. And now finally we get to Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Is there any place that a Chewie swinging on a vine with a Tarzan yell would fit in Empire Strikes Back? Nope. There's no place in the movie where a swinging Wookiee yelling a Tarzan yell would fit. And then you write, it does kind of fit with the whole battle on Endor. It fits with the tone of the Ewoks. There's very little verisimilitude with the Ewoks being able to construct those elaborate traps in no time at all and being able to fly by putting a pair of crude wings on themselves. It fits right with the tone. It doesn't fit with some other parts of the movie. Well, in a way, you've just sort of defined why I hated Return of the Jedi when I saw it and why it was such a crushing disappointment. Because it was made for little kids. Return of the Jedi should have been apocalyptic. The whole movie should have been apocalyptic. They're building up to this apocalyptic conflict, and you should have had, yes, they have this big battle on Endor, but it's undercut by the cute Ewoks, and it's just silly. And the battle, like you said, all the traps and the flying Wookiee, or the flying Ewok, none of that makes any sense. Didn't buy it. I wanted it to take place, the end of Return of the Jedi should have been on Coruscant, and the battle should have been apocalyptic. Burning cities, and maybe Leia would have turned and Han would have had to kill his love or something. And then Luke still could have confronted the Emperor and Vader. But yeah. Now we go to Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Does a Tarzan yelling Chewie belong in The Force Awakens? Stubble says, this is a tough one. I can almost see it in some scenes, but generally I can't go there. For me, it doesn't fit with this movie. Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Thumbs up. Does a Tarzan screaming Chewie belong? Or thumbs down, no, he doesn't. In Episode 8, The Last Jedi. I honestly can't see Tarzan Chewie fit in this movie. As a stretch, maybe I can imagine it in Canto Bight, but not really. Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. Does Tarzan screaming Chewie belong in The Rise of Skywalker? Well, for most of this movie, I can't see it, but it kind of fits in with the attack on top of the Star Destroyers, so it's a maybe for me. Yeah. While we're at it, why don't we try Rogue One as well? It doesn't fit in there at all. That in itself illustrates the difference between the battle scenes in Rogue One and the battle scenes in Return of the Jedi. One of them is for kids and panders to them. The other one doesn't. Neither did Star Wars or Empire. And the rest of the Star Wars movies, I mean, clearly the trilogy, the prequel trilogy, and a lot of well, not, I guess not a lot, but Force Awakens does. But that's a really interesting test. I don't know what you thought of my system for determining if a Star Wars movie was directed toward children or if it was directed towards everyone. The fact that people don't react more strongly towards the Tarzan Chewie scene just shows that the tone of the Endor scene is very different from the rest of the original trilogy, and it stands out. Why I hate it is it breaks the fourth wall. Why is Chewie making a Tarzan scream? This is pure George Lucas. I hated it. It shatters the fourth wall. There's no verisimilitude. It's just, if he just gave out a Wookiee curdling scream, and the whole movie is problematic like that, and that's why I don't like Return of the Jedi very much, but I like your test. I thought that was very, very clever. Let's see, there's a few more. Gerald sends in a tip and says, if Picard encounters the Borg in Season 2, would they recognize him as Locutus? Would they even bother assimilating expiring clone body? I'll hang it up and listen. You know, I would imagine, like, it would be interesting. It would be interesting to see if the Borg did want to retake Locutus back, and then they can't reassimilate him because of his clone body. That was the only way I could see it being interesting. But yeah, look, Picard's clone body, I'm sorry. Why'd you do that? Admiral McCoy was around when he was 137. Picard's only like 93. I hated it so much. AJDZ sent in a super chat and said, I enjoyed your Last Crusade rant. What did you think of the Young Indie show? I thought it was stodgy, and it's just not indie without supernatural MacGuffins. I thought the Young Indiana Jones show was hit and miss. There were some episodes I thought were really good. Like there was a World War I, a trench warfare episode that I remember really thinking was excellent. But yeah, supernatural MacGuffins, I think you kind of might be right. But yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the end of Robservations episode number 427. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank you for your support. Thanks for putting up with my little technical difficulty at the front, which I don't even know what that was. Every time there's a technical difficulty doing these things, there's a new one. Comes out of left field. And thanks for putting up with my writing. I got to figure out, somebody told me how to get rid of ads when I go to websites. I need to start doing that. Maybe disable cookies or whatever. I don't know if I can still get to those websites, but I need to do that. Of course, I will be back. I will be back tonight. So will Elizabeth. We will be back in a mere, I guess it would be 6. In a mere 2 hours for whining about movies. I don't know if it's going to be 6, but we're going to be talking about Christoph Gans's Brotherhood of the Wolf. How cool is that? Christoph Gans's Brotherhood of the Wolf. We moved the show to 6, but Elizabeth is in school. I don't know if she remembers that we have the show at 6, but I guess I'll be back in 2 hours for whining about movies. Episode, I believe, 33, Brotherhood of the Wolf. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Detective Jim. I want to thank Detective Jim's wife, Heidi, just because I like thanking Heidi. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank Jordy Lyons. And I want to thank Louis Yu. I also want to thank The Richard for creating mayhem over on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page with his watch parties. And also, I also want to thank him for doing the Whining About Movies Facebook page and doing watch parties all the time and showing all kinds of interesting stuff. So that is very, very cool. And again, I'm bringing an end, and thanks for everybody who supports the channel in any way, whether it's letters, whether it's super chats, and also tips and all that. I very much appreciate it. It keeps it all going. I'm actually going to buy more lights, actually, for the Robservatory, which is good because there's a broken light up there, and I'm gonna keep adding, thanks to you guys. So yeah, and remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everybody, have a better day.